We have a lot of information to get through today. I have always in the past taught Intro to the Tarot in 6 weeks, 2 hours a night. And even over that time period, people will say, "Oh, Kathleen, there's no way I'm going to get all this information in my head." So to do it all in a day is going to be, you're going to feel by the end of the day like a little overwhelmed. My main goal for the day is you're not going to walk away knowing all the meanings of your 78 cards. I can promise you that. But I hope that you'll leave today with some ways to memorize the cards. Like I'm going to give you some structure, the way it's structured and the way to think about it, and some stories and a little bit of background, so that when you do sit down to try and get the meanings of the cards in your head, you'll have kind of a way to start thinking about it. It'll make it a lot easier. I'm hoping that this workshop will do that for you. If you set your intention to know your cards well, and when I say well, that means that you can draw a card, do a reading for yourself or someone else, so you can draw a card and you know what it means. That will probably take you about 3 months, roughly, before you're actually at that phase. Now, if you really sit down and you've got lots of time on your hands and you're very diligent daily about working with them, I would say that realistically, in a month, you could be able to draw lots of, at least the majority of your cards, and at least recognize them. And that's always the most frustrating thing for a new reader, is pulling that card, you don't know what it means, out comes the book, and every time you have to look up a card, it's chop, chop, chop. By the end of it, you don't know what you said, and it's not making any sense at all to you. And you're completely lost your rhythm and flow and what was it all about. So that's one of my goals for you today. I'm going to probably do the bulk of the talking. I apologize for that. I may seem like a bit of a talking head by the end of today, but it is because there is a fair bit of information to relate. I will take some questions. If you have a really burning question while I'm talking, then you could raise your hand and we'll do the best we can to get to it in a moment. But certainly I have given and allotted some time by the end of today, sometime hopefully around 4 o'clock, where lots of questions we can start fielding those, and I'll do my best to address those for you. I would ask that you keep your questions to the meanings of the cards or the cards themselves. I often get a lot of questions about their reading questions. And the reading questions are all the process that I address actually in the intermediate. So and that's why it's structured as it is. In the intro, I'm really giving you kind of an overview of the meanings of the cards, how to work with your deck, how to start to understand the tarot in a broader perspective, and that sort of thing. And then actually in the intermediate, we'll be doing readings. And that's when you get more sort of instruction along those lines. So there are 2 intermediate classes, and just to let you know, the first intermediate class on October the 24th is almost full. And so that's why I'm offering the second one for November the 7th. It won't be here at Whispering Willows. The second intermediate class will be at the Delta Hotel in downtown Kitchener. So you can just get back to me on that. There's, I think, 2 spots left on the one for the 24th of October. And some people have said already they're sending me checks, so that could almost be full at this moment. I don't know. So I won't go around the room, I apologize, and ask everybody to introduce themselves. I know that's normally done in a workshop, but quite frankly, they'll take us up a whole hour, and we want to get to work. So the first thing I want to talk about is the tarot itself, and start looking at, I need to have a look at mine. So your overview page, by the way, we'll just go through your package a little bit. The overview page is, of course, what we're going to cover today. We will break for lunch at noon. between 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock. There's a number of places around here where you can grab a soup or a sandwich. There's Tim Hortons, I think, straight through here onto King. And then we'll start, though, back right at 1 o'clock. Tracy wants to say something. Tracy is the owner of Whispering Willows, as if some of you don't realize that. That is the shop that's in the front building here. And Tracy will be opening at noon, the shop. She does sell tarot cards and books, and she has quite a selection in there, actually, and she is offering 10% discount. So,
yeah, I just wanted to say that when we break for lunch, if you guys want to go grab a bite and want to come back and take a look around the shop, I'm offering 10% off for those who are taking the class today. So.
Which is great.
Okay.
Thank you. And I am going to talk a little bit about decks this morning. People always ask me, what deck should I use? When I started teaching the tarot back in 1990, the first time, I was using the Mother Peace tarot at that time. That was my favorite deck. I had met the tarot in 1974, and so the first deck that I saw when I was introduced to it was the Waite deck, the Rider-Waite. That is a very common deck. You often see that everywhere. And so a lot of people like to start with the Waite. And the reason is because many decks, later decks, are what's called sort of knockoffs of the Waite, but they're kind of based on that tradition. So if you start with a rider and you get to know the meanings, you get to know that deck quite well. Then if you want to branch off later to a deck that really appeals to you in terms of its symbolism and visuals, and some of them are kind of connected to your ancestry, perhaps, of Norse decks, and they have India decks and native decks, and women's decks. So anyway, the first deck I met was the Waite deck, and I didn't have time really to study it. I was in university, and I just did not have those hours to memorize the cards. In 1985, I was in the Toronto Women's Bookstore, and I saw the Mother Peace Tarot, which is a feminist deck, and I asked them behind the counter, what is that? And she said, that's the Mother Peace Tarot, it's a feminist deck. And I said, I didn't know they made such a thing. And actually, the Mother Peace was only the second feminist deck to go into print. So that deck was very exciting for me. Vicki Noble does excellent work. She is a brilliant feminist historian, and if that is something you're interested in, you certainly would love Vicki's work. It's very, very good. However, it is in a particular perspective. So anyway, I started with the Mother Peace, and I just said to everybody in the class, everybody get themselves a Mother Peace deck, and that's what we're going to look at, and we will look at it from that perspective. And then since then, years and years went by, what I found was, I just recommend that people start with the Waite, and then they can go from there on to, you know, kind of a specialization that they're particularly interested in. So there is kind of two primary historical paths for the tarot. One is Waite. Arthur Waite was a Freemason. He was one of those grand poobahs in Masonry. And within the Freemasons, part of their initiation was to make yourself a tarot deck. And I don't know whether that's still within their traditions. They're very secretive about their entrances and initiations and all that sort of thing. But it was at one time, if you wanted to be a Freemason, you had to get your hands on a tarot deck. Someone would lend it to you, very likely, and you had to paint your own deck. And then you would hand that back to whoever, you know, lent you the deck, and that would be your deck that you would use. And so Waite was very familiar with the tarot, and he engaged the services of Pamela Coleman Smith to paint a deck that he felt the general public could actually use, because prior to that there were no pictures on the pip cards. The pip cards are the 1 to 10 in all your suits. There was no pictures in there. You just see, you know, 4 swords So you would have to know what your fours were and what swords meant and kind of put that together. And Waite said, you know, that's really hard for people. It would be great if we could depict what they mean in a picture form. So Pamela Coleman Smith, and this is a very feminist story. She was a totally unknown artist. She was a black lesbian from New York, and he invited her to come and stay on his rather handsome estates and do the paintings. And she spent, I don't know how many years painting these paintings. They were about in original size, maybe a little bit bigger than your folder. Beautiful work, actually. And once they were completed, he said, thanks, bye. And she went back to New York to die in abject poverty, as a matter of fact. While Waite went on to join with Ryder, who was the publisher, which is why it was called the Ryder-Waite. Ryder was the publisher who put the cards into print and is now, of course, one of the widest sold tarot deck in the world. In 1952, Kaplan, who was then president of U.S. Games, he was met with the president of the Ryder publisher. And Ryder publisher said to Kaplan, you know, I don't know whether this would fly in the U.S. Do you want to give it a try? Here's a case of them and, you know, see if you think there's any interest. So Kaplan took his case of books to some of the New York booksellers and said, do you think, you know, these might move? And so, of course, you know, to make a long story short, they sold over 100,000 copies within, I think, 2 months. And they've sold millions and millions and millions of copies since. So that is the story of the Ryder-Waite. Now you'll often see it referred to as a Smith, or the Smith-Waite, because there was a movement, certainly within the tarot movement, say, where is Pamela Coleman Smith's name around? She should be quite prominently showcased and known since she was the artist. And often within tarot, you find there is those kind of two people that are involved in the production of a tarot deck. You have the illustrator or the artist who will work closely with the tarotist, and they'll do the painting or the illustrations to depict it. And sadly, it's very typical also for eventually the illustrator, artist, and the tarotist to come to disagreement, as that's happened with a number of decks. The very rare one is where you get an artist and an interpreter in the same person. And one that comes to my mind is Alexandra Giannetti. Tracy does have her set in her bookstore. Alexandra Giannetti has produced a beautiful deck called The Wheel of Change. That is, her deck though is quite a shift over from Waite. I wouldn't call her deck a Waite knockoff at all. She has really her own and very brilliant woman and has done some extraordinary work. Mm-hmm. But within all tarot decks, there are elements. So the first thing you want to notice about your about the tarot is what are the elements in the cards. So there's the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And so all the suits have their own element, and each one of what's called the major arcana has its own element as well. There's 3 primary components to a tarot deck. And all tarot decks, by the way, have 78 cards, and they're all built on this structure. There are other decks out there that are called oracle decks, and there's decks that, you know, angel decks, and a number, but those are not tarot decks. A classic tarot deck always has 78 cards, and we'll have a major arcana, which is major secrets. This is from 0 to 21, starts at the Fool, and will wind up with the Universe, or the World card, at number 21. Then you have what's called the pips, or the suit cards. There's 4 suits, and they're 1 to 10, or ace to 10. And then you have the court cards, and there should be 4 court cards: a page, a knight, a queen, and a king, or some variation. Some have named them, for example, to be part of a family. And so it's son and daughter and mother and father, as an example.